see how good they can be. That's a pretty big delay. Pretty good. Is this your first one?
I've been to ACEC, but not in a while. Hey Kevin, how's it going? Good.
Excuse me, guys, your attention, please. We want to go ahead and start our meeting.
I've got about
about 8 minutes after 12, so we want to allow plenty of time for our speaker and let you guys get back to work. I want to welcome you to the 2021 year for GSPE. And my name is Dan Rickable. I'm the president. I guess I can take this thing off since I'm waiting for everybody out here. What I want to tell you as you get to the tables, they pre-arrange the lunches. So if you see the list when you check in, if you remember what you got, try to find that mark. I think there's an initial on each box. So find a lunch that has that particular sandwich on there. But we do want to go ahead and start our meeting. We've got the meeting agenda on each table. So again, welcome, and I want to start us off with a pledge of allegiance and prayer. So if you would stay standing, and we do have our flag here today. So I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for another year, and just thank you for the opportunities you've given us each to make a difference in the designs and the influence that we have through the knowledge you've given us through our training and experience. And just thank you for the relationships that we have as well. And just pray that you continue to use us to make a positive difference in our community and in the world. And I just pray that you bless each person and family represented here today, that you keep them safe during this pandemic and during this difficult time, and just give them strength and wisdom. I'll be with our speaker today, God, in the words he would say. I thank you for this food that's been provided. May it strengthen our bodies to serve you better. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. With that, go ahead and have a seat, and I'm going to bring up our Vice President, Nathan McDonald, and he's going to tell you a few things that's on your table.
Hey folks, don't forget to sign in if you need a PDH or to make sure you're squared up for lunch. Everything's handled on that. On your table there's some note cards and a pen. If you would like to be added to the mailing list, it makes it easier to kind of get signed up and know what's coming up. If you would give us your email address, we will make that happen. Also, if you've got any great ideas for future speakers, projects, or programs you'd like to see, that would be a great help to us, and we would greatly appreciate it if you'd write it on that note card. Just kind of leave it at your table when you leave. Another thing we want to point out is we're in a new year. Great time to become a member of NSPE and Georgia GSPE. Two great places to network, also to resources that will just make you a better engineer. At the bottom of the page, there's a web address that kind of has a list of the benefits of being a member. I found it super helpful, so maybe go check that out. And then also, we are seeking a secretary for 2021. So we would love either you to volunteer someone or to volunteer yourself to fill that position. Here's Will Carter. He's got a few things.
Actually, an update on the secretary. Thomas Parrott from Cranston Engineering has volunteered to serve as secretary for the rest of the year, so he'll be taking over for me. I won't be here through the whole year, so he'll be taking over to serve the rest of the year. We'll get him looped in, so thank you, Thomas, for that. We've got some upcoming events. You may know this time of year we've got Engineers Week coming up, a little bit different than usual. Typically, we would go around to different schools and present to classes and to students, try to get them excited about the potential of becoming an engineer, learn a little bit about what it's like. This year, obviously, going in person, not quite as easy, but we are hoping to set up some virtual presentations for that. So if that's something you're interested in being involved in, go ahead and you can use those same note cards and write that down, put your contact information and mention that that's what you're interested in. We'll reach out to you on that, or if you'd rather, you can come and speak to one of us officers, and we'll get you on the list. Those are really fun to do, and a good way to give back and get kids excited about it. Math Counts is also coming up again this year, not an in-person event. They're doing it virtually, so got 3 local schools signed up for that. They are, in February, they will be doing their local competitions for that. They're doing it all virtual. Normally we would have an event that we'd go to and volunteer to help run, but again, this year, being virtual, there's no need for that. But then the winner of the local chapter invitational gets to go on to the state competition, and that event is March 25th. And we will actually need some volunteers to help proctor that. Again, I think it will be a virtual event, but we'll need some people to help for that. So if you're interested in volunteering with that, once again, the note card's on your table. You can mark that down, let us know. Or there's emails here for Jeff Mercer, who is our officer in charge of organizing that event. You can send him an email and let him know that you'd be interested in helping with that. So all of those would be a great help to us and to the community and training the next generation of engineers. Our upcoming events, we're working on some stuff coming up. Some of you may know that the SPLOST, the Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax, SPLOST 8, is going to be on a referendum locally in March. So in February, we're looking to have somebody come and speak to us about that. There's a lot of very cool projects involved in that, both in the engineering world and in the kind of art and culture. So looking to get somebody who can come here and tell us a little bit more about it, get you informed before the vote in March on that. Our March meeting, we're looking at having somebody come and speak to us about the James Brown Arena development. Brad Ussery, who runs Fat Man's and several other restaurants, is the president. Trey, you can help me make sure I've got this right. He's the president of the commission. Coliseum. Sorry, I missed the last part. Coliseum Authority. So we're working with him to find somebody who can come speak to us about that ongoing development. Should be a good one there. So that's our March category. And then we're hoping we can get Don Grantham and Russell McMurray here in April to speak to us. That should be a good one if we can make that one work. So that's what we got coming in the future. And again, like Nathan said, if you've got speakers or topics you'd like to hear, please put it on those note cards. Let us know. We're here to get you things that you're interested in hearing about. So that's the easiest way for us to make sure that happens. That's everything for our schedule updates. We'll bring Dan back up to introduce the speaker.
I just want to recap a couple of things that Will talked about. I hope you will take just a few minutes sometime before you leave today with the note cards, because we really would like to get feedback on programs that you would like to see. We still have some open slots. We're looking to fill the May meeting. Right now, the fall meetings, whether we have 3 or 4, the only one we have lined up right now is the Plant Bowl update. Jeff Brower, who heads our math counts program, is lined that up. So we've already got that secured. But if you have some other ideas, it could be a tour of a plant. I know we toured Plant Vogel in the spring. I think it was a year before last. We went out to Plant Vogel and did a tour, but there might be another plant or other kind of tour that you think would be of interest, or some kind of speaker or program, or any other thing you think of. Engineers Week, I really want to encourage you on that as well. If you have anybody that has school-age children and you know that they would benefit from a virtual presentation during Engineers Week, the dates are there on the sheet. We would really like to promote that. That's a big thing of what NSPE and GSPE has done in the past, is speaking to the schools. I know I've done it several times, Trey Wingate as well, and others. So we've built bridge, had them do bridge competitions, to speaking to them just about what engineering is all about, what you can expect from school, to what you can make as an engineer, that kind of thing. So I think it could really be beneficial. And if you can't speak personally, that's okay. But if you can identify a school, we might be able to get something lined up. So just anything you can jot down, that would really help. As far as the program, the benefits at the bottom of the sheet that's on your table, the benefits of being a member of the National Society of Professional Engineers, and in particular the Georgia version of that, GSPE. You'll have free access to PDH seminars, of course, networking and career development opportunities, locally and statewide, and then of course there's business discounts and other things that are listed at the link at the bottom of that page. So with that, I'll ask Trey Wingert to come up and introduce our speaker, Sully.
Thank you, Dan. I know most of you have probably seen Sully here on his annual excursions to Augusta, and we appreciate him for making this excursion today. It's a little bit easier than his roots and beginnings in this business world that he is in. If I'm not mistaken, you spent some of your younger years as a riverboat captain at Disney, learning your stock in trade and your presentation skills that we'll see on exhibit today. Sully is our president and CEO of the American Council of Engineer Consultants and here in Georgia, and has done a wonderful job of working with the Georgia Society of Professional Engineers on many different occasions on our annual engineers banquet that comes about each year, and many other functions, as well as just leading us in some of the things that are important to engineering. And his staff is a great voice for us on the Hill in Atlanta, and making sure that things that we need to know about get shown in light, don't get swept away in the dark. And we'd like to thank Mr. Sully for coming today, and look forward to some of the information we have for us.
Thank you, boss. Appreciate it. Trey forgot to mention he is one of my 17 bosses. ACEC Georgia has a board of directors of 17 members, and that is one of them. You look great today, Trey. I just want to say. Actually, everybody in this room is my boss, because that's what we do. We work for Georgia's engineering industry. As we like to say, we represent all the engineering firms in Georgia. Some of them pay us for that. And those of you that do, we appreciate it. Appreciate what you do to support our industry. And I am glad to be a part of this industry. I'm glad I'm not still shooting fiberglass hippos on the Jungle Cruise of Walt Disney World, because if I was, I probably would have been fired back in the fall when everything went to hell. They laid off at Walt Disney World, I think it was about 29,000 employees that were laid off out of about 75,000 that work at Walt Disney World. And I don't think that jungle skippers are essential industries. As much fun as it was telling jokes to people from around the world and shooting hippos. But we are an essential industry, and that has been a wonderful thing for us over the last year when you compare what we've all been through versus what some other folks have been through in the hospitality and the restaurant industry and others that were decimated by this recession. We were certainly proud last year when the pandemic first hit, and everything seemed like it was very uncertain. We were proud and happy to stand in the breach for the engineering industry, and first playing whack-a-mole with all the different local ordinances that were coming into place, shelter-in-place orders, making sure that engineers were declared to be essential, and that our folks could continue working for our clients and working on projects. And then ultimately we decided that playing whack-a-mole with 535 cities and 159 counties was probably not the best approach, and so we started working with the governor's office to have that first statewide shelter-in-place order issued, and to make sure that that statewide shelter-in-place order superseded the local ordinances, so that we had one level playing field across the state, regardless of which side of the jurisdictional line you might happen to be in. So that was, I think, critical to our industry, and we're certainly happy to do that. And then, of course, we had the problem that our projects couldn't go forward because all the local governments shut down, and so there weren't any inspectors and plan reviewers and things like that. So then we started working with the governor's office to get that executive order issued that allowed for licensed engineers and architects to provide private plan review and inspection services. Fortunately, in 2019, we didn't know there was going to be a pandemic, but we had just passed an update to those laws to strengthen that opportunity for normal times for private plan review and inspection. But it didn't envision, the way that law was written was basically the developer would come in or the owner would come in, and they would go to the jurisdiction and say, hey, jurisdiction, can you get this done in 30 days? And if they said yes, you basically had to go that route. Only if they said they couldn't get it done within that period of time could you go to the private route. Executive order that the governor issued allowed folks that had already chosen to go the public route to switch midstream and go to private plan reviews and inspections. And then we ultimately made that permanent. Those changes that the governor put in the executive order, we made those permanent when the General Assembly came back in session in June. And I think the governor's office really liked it, because now apparently they want to make some more changes in state law to the private plan review and inspection statute. So we're actually currently talking to the governor's office about those changes to tighten up the timeline, to give folks a little shorter timeline, owners and developers a little shorter timeline to get into that. But anyway, it's great to be part of an essential industry. It's great to work with Georgia's engineering industry. And it's great to be in Augusta. I appreciate y'all having me over. It's always good to be with y'all. And particularly since I'm not commuting as much now, the 5-hour time in the car, I get caught up on those podcasts that I'm way behind on, that I used to not be behind on when I was driving 2 hours each way to work every morning back in the pre-pandemic times from Snellville to Atlanta. I appreciate the 5 hours. I got 3 done on the way over. I'm hoping I'll get 3 more done on the way back. I do want to leave some time for questions, so I'm going to try to go quickly through the update and get to some questions, because y'all may have some things that you're concerned about or you've got questions about that I might not have thought about. But let me start by saying it is that time of year. Lock up your wives and daughters and all your valuables. The General Assembly is in session. No man's life, liberty, or property are safe when the General Assembly is in session, the phrase goes. I'm not sure that's going to be too much of a worry this year. I think every session is unpredictable. Anybody who says at the beginning of a legislative session, well, here's how it's going to go, here's all the issues that are going to be coming up, they do not know what they're talking about. Never believe that person, because nobody can ever predict a General Assembly session at the beginning. But all signs are right now that they all are pretty unanimous on one thing, which is that they want to get in and get the hell out as fast as possible. The only real difference in getting in and getting out is the Senate would actually like to get in, go ahead and pass the supplemental budget, which is the budget that kind of comes in and course corrects for the current fiscal year, which we're in, which ends in June. They'd like to go ahead, the Senate would like to go ahead and pass that so that we're good for this fiscal year, and then get out of town and come back later when maybe the pandemic is in a different posture. The House would like to just stay in, plow through, get the supplemental budget done and the big budget done for the next fiscal year, and then go home. That's a little bit of disagreement right now, but again, it seems consistent between the House and the Senate. They'd like to get in and get out and have a relatively quiet session. This year, there's a lot of tension to get in and get out, because we're in a redistricting year. Every 10 years, there's a census. The year we elect the president, 2020 was the census year. And then the year after that, the odd number year, you take that census data, and the state legislatures around the country have to redraw congressional and state legislative maps, of course, down to the county commission and city council level. Those maps have to be withdrawn or redrawn every 10 years. So you would not want to do that if you just think about how politics works for just a second, of redrawing your map, Senator, while we're debating legislation. You would not want to do those two things at the same time. You might not get very good legislation, and you might also not get very good maps. So what they tend to do is get the legislation done in a normal session, and then have a special legislative session that's just dedicated for drawing those maps. Sounds like that's probably going to be in August or September of this year. So knowing that I got to come back in August or September makes me really, even more so, want to get the hell out of Atlanta as quick as possible in the spring, so that it's not so too close to when I've got to come back in August. So redistricting is certainly going to be a big issue this year, fortunately we don't have a dog in that hunt, so we don't have to get engaged in that process. But certainly it'll be interesting to see those maps drawn and how they're drawn. And certainly y'all who are here in Augusta know how crazy congressional maps can be. I'm sure y'all remember some of those maps from the 2000 redistricting, and the squiggly lines that some places where it was only as wide as the right of way. Some of those congressional maps, it was pretty crazy stuff. I don't think we'll see that this time, but certainly it'll be a battle. The budget is the big topic of conversation in the General Assembly, obviously, and it is a great example of how Georgia has been blessed as compared to other states. When the pandemic first kicked in, we started having calls with all of my colleagues from around the country. At the very beginning, we were on twice a week, then we went to once a week, then we went to every other week. We're still doing every other week. But one of the things that was striking to me in those calls was when you would hear from my colleagues in the Northeast or California or other states, how blessed we were in Georgia to have the economy that we have had during this pandemic as compared to other states. There are some other states that have really been decimated, and those of you that work for national firms probably know that the economy in other places where your firms are practicing is not quite as good and not quite as robust as what it is here. And particularly those states where there are pretty prominent public sector unions, where there's always this tension between how much work gets done in-house by the agency and how much work gets contracted out. There's been tough sledding in those states, and we're really fortunate in Georgia. The other thing that means is that we've been really fortunate from a budgetary standpoint. You know, when the General Assembly was in session last year, they put some pretty significant cuts in place across the board in state agencies, assuming that there was going to be a significant deep recession that was going to negatively impact revenue. Certainly there has been a negative impact on revenue, but not nearly what we thought it was going to be. When you look at SPLOST revenues, when you look at local sales tax revenues, those were, before the pandemic hit, they were already, you know, for most SPLOST that were already in place, they were already well ahead of what they had originally budgeted when those SPLOST were voted on. But even with that surplus, so to speak, those sales tax revenues have really rebounded quickly from the dip that we had in March and April. Gas tax revenues have been strong. Income tax revenues have been strong. And even the job situation, we lost at the I'm going to say the peak, but I guess it'd be the trough of unemployment, which would have been April, May of last year. Georgia had lost about 600,000 jobs. We've now got back all but 100,000 of those jobs that we were at in the trough. So we really have been fortunate. So unlike other states, particularly in the Northeast, that are going to be having legislative sessions this year talking about furloughs, talking about further draconian cuts to budgets, Georgia's supplemental budget conversation, they're actually putting money back in. So they cut, and now they've seen the new revenue, the actual revenue that came in, and they're actually going to restore a lot of those cuts, including about $600 million to K-12 education that was cut. And that's certainly going to be a good thing around the state. So the budget situation is good, and the big budget that they'll pass for next fiscal year will not have any furloughs, will not have any cuts. It'll be kind of a status quo budget. So that is always a good thing, particularly when we're talking about capital expenditures. I know y'all are probably interested in people building things and hiring engineers to design it, but for those two of you that might be, capital budgets look good, including $100 million for GDOT, for the bridge program that's been a pretty perennial capital outlay by the General Assembly, and restorations to GDOT's budget, which GDOT had gotten significantly cut last year, and most of those cuts are being restored. So it's good news, and Mr. Grantham and Commissioner McMurray, when they come talk to you in March, will hopefully have a good, happy story to tell about GDOT's budget and its capital program. If there's a not bright spot, if I'd come to you 6 months ago, I would have said we'd be talking today about a freight and logistics bill, a big freight logistics funding bill. Some of y'all probably have followed that Freight Logistics Commission, the Georgia Freight Logistics Commission, a member of which is Rick Toole from Augusta, proud son of Augusta, is a member of that Freight and Logistics Commission. They've been meeting for the last 2 years, trying to identify all of the capital infrastructure investments that the state needs to make to accommodate the massive amount of freight that is coming through Georgia, particularly with the Georgia ports at Savannah, which are predicted to double in capacity, or throughput, I should say, in the next 8 years. So where's all that freight going to go? We sure as hell don't want it all going on the interstates and big trucks. To the extent that it needs to go on the interstates, it would probably be better to have that in barrier-separated managed lanes that are separate from the general traffic. To the extent we can get more of that on rail, we need to do that. But in order to get more of it on rail, you're going to have longer trains and taller trains, double-stack trains. Well, when you start talking about double-stack trains, you're talking about running into some bridges that aren't tall enough to accommodate that. So you're going to have to replace a bunch of bridges around the state to accommodate those double-stack trains. When you talk about longer trains, you're talking about bisecting communities for a long period of time. That messes up business and commerce in those communities and makes voters in those communities not very happy that the long trains are blocking their ingress and egress from wherever they're trying to get from and to. So you're talking about grade separations. You're going to have to create some grade separations around the state. All of those investments, whether it's barrier separated lanes or grade separations or bridge replacements, the total of those would require about a $1.5 billion per year investment for about 10 years. Well, that's a lot of money. I don't know about you, but 1.5 billion one time is a lot of money. 1.5 billion for 10 or 20 years is a significant investment. About 6 months ago, I would have said that would be what we would be talking about in this legislative session, but unfortunately, the ardor for that has cooled a little bit. Of course, the economy is still a little shaky, and the thought of creating $1.5 billion worth of new revenue, that's a heavy lift. The biggest tax increase or revenue increase that we've had in Georgia's history was House Bill 170 back in 2015, which was just shy of $1 billion per year. So the trucking industry hasn't quite got on board with some of the user fees that they would be required to pay. You've also got some challenges relative to the state investing in privately owned infrastructure, specifically the railroads. If you ever dealt with the railroads, you know, God, the railroad, right? They own all their stuff, and they're not going to let the state own all their stuff, but they would like to take the state's money to invest and upgrade that stuff. But the Georgia Constitution, we're one of 2 states in the Union that has a thing called the Gratuities Clause. And the Gratuities Clause specifically prohibits the state from basically giving resources to something that's going to be privately owned. There are some exceptions to that, and we're working through that ways to get around that particular provision of the Constitution. There are some challenges. So I guess that's a long way of saying that I think what we're going to end up seeing is, rather than a big freight logistics funding bill this year, we're probably going to see some enabling legislation that gets put in place this year that provides some tools so that when funding can be brought to bear, we're ready to put those funds into action, and probably an extension of the Freight Logistics Commission for another year. And then I think what's going to happen is that they're going to include within that some funding that would allow the hiring of a big-time private consultant, your Deloitte's or your McKinsey's, something like that, where that company would come in and essentially figure out for the legislature what sources of revenue were available and what would be best sources of revenue to put in place. So I think what we're looking at is probably a funding bill next year. But still, for those of you that are in the freight and logistics infrastructure design business, $1.5 billion per year in new funding for the foreseeable future would be a very, very good thing, and I remain confident that we will see that next year. As far as ACEC Georgia, what we'll be working on for the engineering industry this year, really 2 things. Speaking of study committees, we're going to be creating a House-Senate joint study committee to look at qualifications-based selection. Most of you are probably familiar with qualifications-based selection. We believe that is the way that design professionals should be selected. They should be selected based on qualifications rather than on price. That has, of course, been federal law since the Nixon administration for federal projects where federal dollars are associated, and it's been the law in Georgia since the 80s for state agencies. It is not required for local governments. A lot of local governments do follow qualifications-based selection, and ACCG and GMA both promulgate QBS as a best practice, but it is not required at the local government level. So the purpose of the study committee would be to explore that and to bring to light and educate why QBS is the best way to engage design professionals and how that can be done at the local level. Specifically looking to our neighbors to the north and to the south. QBS has been required in Florida at the local government level since the 80s. So long time, well-established practice. And in Tennessee, about 5 years ago, it was extended to be required at the local level. So what that study committee will probably be looking at primarily is how very small, we'll just say less sophisticated local governments implement QBS on the local level. Governments that don't have tons of staff and tons of engineers on staff, how do they do QBS in small jurisdictions in Tennessee and small jurisdictions in Florida? So, for those of you who may have experience with working with those local jurisdictions in Florida and Tennessee, if you have any good examples of either procurements that you've been involved in those states, or procurement officials that you know that are strong supporters of qualifications-based selection, please let me know. We'd love to get that information in front of the study committee. So hopefully we'll be able to introduce that bill in the next few weeks. We'll create that study committee that would work toward making recommendations possibly by the end of the year. And of course, I should say, it is our intent to continue our strong, close relationship with the Association of County Commissioners of Georgia and the Georgia Municipal Association, to work with them on this process, to include them in this process. We have very good relationships with both of those organizations, and this is something we've already been talking to them about, and certainly would not dream of doing anything along those lines without their full support and participation. So not an adversarial process by any means. What might be a little bit more adversarial will be the big thing that we're trying to do, the other big thing that we're trying to do, and this is legislation. And it involves the Professional Licensing Board Division of the Secretary of State of Georgia's office. How many PEs do we have in the room? I assume everybody, since this is a society of PEs. Does anybody enjoy the service that you get from the Professional Licensing Board Division? No hands? Has anyone ever been frustrated by a lack of service from the Professional Licensing Board Division of the Secretary of State's office? Yes. This is not a new problem. This is a problem that's been going on for years and years and years. I think when Doris Wilmer was on the board, she was a member of the Pels Board in 2005. They did a big study, like a year-long study of problems and solutions. We've been working on this. I've been beating my head up against this wall for several years with two different Secretaries of State, Secretary Kemp when he was Secretary of State, and Secretary Raffensperger, Brad Raffensperger, PE, I should mention, a licensed professional engineer. You would think having a licensed professional engineer as the Secretary of State would be the solution to our problems. Before this year, I thought the problem was funding. And that's a tough problem to solve because those of you whose memories is long, I'm going to name some names for you. Max Cleland, Kathy Cox, Louis Massey, Karen Handel, Brian Kemp. Those are the last 5 Secretaries of State. Does anybody know what those 5 people all have in common? That's right, they all ran for higher office while they were Secretary of State. So, you might be surprised to know that some of the members of the General Assembly also sometimes thinking about running for higher office. Sometimes when they're shaving in the morning, they see a governor looking back at them. And so their incentive to make that office work well, thereby making the holder of that office look good, isn't particularly strong. So if you'd asked me a year ago, I would have said the problem is funding, but it's a tough problem to overcome because the General Assembly doesn't really want to make the Secretary of State look good, right? Because that's a rival. The past year or the past 6 months have made me understand that it's not just a funding problem, it's also a cultural problem. And I hate to say this, but the reality is that the Professional Licensing Board Division of the Secretary of State's office is a can't-do organization. That's systemic, that's cultural. All businesses have a culture. We know when we work with governments have a culture as well. And they've pretty clearly shown themselves to be a can't-do organization. So I'll just give you one example of can't-do. Their legislation was passed last year, which created a structural engineer's license, right? And that says that as of January 1, 2021, you've got to start issuing structural engineer's licenses. And there was another provision that says if you're a licensed PE and you're a structural engineer, you decide you're a structural engineer. There's no test, there's no exam, just you say you're a structural engineer. You can be grandfathered in and get that structural engineer's license. And all you have to do is fill out a simple affidavit. All the Professional Licensing Board Division staff had to do was post the affidavit. The affidavit was done in August. All they had to do was post the affidavit on the website for you to print out, because it's 2020, we would definitely print out PDFs. We wouldn't want to have it fillable online where you can just type things in. You'd want to print that out, get a ballpoint, fill it out, and then mail it in. That's a very simple sort of 1995 era process, right? I print out a PDF, I write on it, I put it in an envelope, I lick the envelope, I put a stamp on it like it's 1995, and I send it in. That was too much work for them to do. Only when their cage was rattled at the Secretary of State's office in Atlanta did they finally post that affidavit and allow it to be sent in. December 14th, January 1. That is not an ideal span of time for the structural engineers of Georgia who wanted to get that license to fill that form out and send it in. They had been begged by the Pels Board members, and I just want to draw a clear distinction so that nobody is uncertain about what we're talking about. The appointed members, appointed by the governor of the state of Georgia to the Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors Board, are awesome. And as bad as it works for you, it would be so much worse if they weren't doing all that they are doing to try to make it work better. So they had a meeting and said, look, if you'll just put that thing on the website, and you'll just get like a banker's box, one of the cardboard banker's boxes, and when you get the envelopes, just put them in the box. You don't have to open them, you don't have to touch them, just put them in the box. We'll drive down on our own time, and we'll process them for you. No, no, no. Too much work. We couldn't possibly post a PDF on a website for people to print out and mail to us. That is when it occurred to me that this is a systemic problem, and that in good conscience, I could not go to the General Assembly and say, hey guys, if you'll just throw more money at this agency and allow them to hire more people and introduce them into that culture, that'll solve the problem. That's where I was 6 months ago, no longer there. So, long story short, we're going to get out of the Secretary of State's office. We will still be administratively attached to the Secretary of State's office, but the model we're following is the Real Estate Commission office. The Real Estate Commission was created in the 70s. The Real Estate Commission, the real estate industry actually sued the state of Georgia, got a favorable judge's decision, and the state was like, oh, we're scared now, entered into a settlement, and that settlement was they created the Georgia Real Estate Commission, which is its own separate budgetary unit. They actually get the money that they pay in fees back from the state. Crazy concept, I know. And that board gets to hire their executive director, actually they call him commissioner, and that commissioner gets to hire the staff and fire the staff and decide where their office is going to be and make all the decisions for that board. That's all we're asking for. We're asking for exactly what the Real Estate Commission has had for 40 some odd years. And coincidentally enough, for those of you that have license in other states, basically that's the way every other freaking state in the south of the United States does their engineers licensing board. They're all independent, they're all self-funded by the licensure fees that the engineers pay there, and they all get to hire and fire their own staff and have their own offices. We've studied it from Texas all the way up to Kentucky, and uniformly, except for Georgia, that's the way it's done, and that's what we're going to be working on. We've had good meetings with the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, who is supportive. We've had good meetings with the governor's office, which have given us their blessing. We've had good meetings with our bill sponsor, who's a realtor, who thought that would be handy to have a realtor who could explain, well, hey, this is how my profession does it. Why can't these guys have that? So that's the big bill that we're going to be working on, and I think if we can get that done this session, that will solve a problem that, again, has been going on longer than I've been working for the engineering industry, and probably longer than some of the people in this room have been in the engineering industry. It's a long-standing problem, and we intend to get it solved. Federal outlook, I think we're going to see an infrastructure bill. I know it seemed like for 4 years every week was infrastructure week, but we never got any infrastructure funding. I do think that when you look at the Republicans and the Democrats, the very few bipartisan issues that both sides support, infrastructure is one of those few issues. So obviously you've got some pieces and parts that get in place. The nominee for U.S. DOT Secretary, Pete Buttigieg, should be voted on today or tomorrow. The committee has already favorably forwarded his recommendation or his nomination. So expect him to get put in place. And I think sometime between now and July, we should see a large infrastructure bill, which would include a long-term extension of surface transportation funding. And there is a growing coalition in Washington, D.C. of sort of business-oriented and transportation-oriented organizations that are pushing for sort of a July 4th deadline. Like, y'all need to get this done, and you need to get it done before July 4th. So I think that's something that we'll see at the federal level, and I'm kind of bullish on that. I'm also bullish on Georgia's economy, as I mentioned earlier. I think if we can start jabbing people in arms and getting people vaccinated and get on the other side of this pandemic, hopefully by the summer, I think our economy is poised to explode. I think when you think about those hardest hit sectors, the hospitality industry, the restaurant industry, I think there's so much pent up demand. They're not going to be able to have enough Delta flights for all the places that people are going to want to go when they get past this, and all the restaurants are going to, I mean, there's some families that will probably not eat at their dinner table at home for, you know, maybe a year after it's over, because they'll be so excited to be able to go out and visit their local restaurants and bars. And I think that our hospitality industry here in Georgia and our vacation resort destinations in Georgia are going to see the benefit of that. And then the other thing that we're thinking about when we're thinking about the future is your workplace. I think there's going to be a lot of things that are going to change as a result of this pandemic, and certainly one of those is we've all experienced remote work, right? And I am not of the opinion that we're all going to go back to the office 5 days a week, 10 hours a day, 52 weeks a year. I'm also not of the opinion that we're all going to be working in our magic cubicles at home remotely for every day of the year. I think it's going to be somewhere in between. But we as an industry really have to grapple with this, because it's not just what does my office look like? How much rent am I paying? Do I need to be paying for all this space when not everybody's going to the office? We're a talent-based industry, and y'all know better than I do, it's a competition for talent, right? That's the success or failure of your firm, is being able to hire talented professionals and get them to come to your firm and get them to stay at your firm and not leave to go somewhere else. And so this is really an attraction and retention issue for our industry as we deal with this competition for talent, and figuring it out is something that we're trying to spend a lot of time thinking about on your behalf, so that we can push out best practices and good information for y'all to use to make good decisions about how to win that competition for talent going forward. Because I do think, while I don't think we're going to be all or the other, one thing or the other, I do think any firm that thinks we're going to go back to, and I need you in the office 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year, no exceptions unless you're bleeding, that is not a firm that is going to win the competition for talent in the future, in my opinion. Some flexibility is going to be required as a way of doing business, and there's a lot of upsides to that. Not the least of which, I'll just say, a tremendously valuable resource that this industry has been losing before the pandemic, and that was its female employees. And oftentimes they were losing those female employees that they had invested in, that they had developed, because they were forced to make a decision and they had to go to leave the industry. If they had some flexibility and some accommodation that could be brought to bear, those people would not be leaving our industry, and that would certainly help in our attraction and retention and our race for talent. So I think it's a good thing, and again, we spend a lot of time thinking about it on your behalf so we can push out good information on it. So that's all I'm going to talk about, and I'm happy to take any questions about anything, whether I covered it or not.
So on the qualification basis, once the committee finishes their study, do you see that eventually become like a state law, or all local? This college will have to follow that state law on that basis of selection?
In a perfect world, yes, and that's certainly what we would like to see. But again, we don't intend to have an adversarial process with the counties and the cities. What we want is hopefully for the counties and cities to understand, oh, we want to do this. This is actually better for us. We're actually going to get a better product. We're going to get better design. We're going to save money overall on the project. I mean, design is roughly 8 to 10% of the project cost. That other 90% is construction. And if you'll spend the money here on design, you're going to save the money a lot of times on the construction side. So those kinds of things, if you can get the jurisdictions to go, yeah, okay, hopefully they will want to have that requirement to make sure that the best way of doing things is the way of doing things. But it's got to be something where we bring them to the table and they see it. The two challenges that we have to that, or the two barriers that we have to that, is first of all, the universal. How many local government employees do we have in here? We have a few. If you know anything about counties and city associations at the Capitol, the one thing they will always oppose is the General Assembly telling them how to do anything. Local governments do not like the General Assembly saying, you must do this. That's just knee-jerk reflexive reaction. So that's the first objection. And the second objection, which I think is legitimate, is, hey, that's great for the city of Atlanta. They got a ton of people. They can have 30 engineers on staff to process those, RFQ responses. But what about Hayhira? And I hate to pick on Hayhira, it's like reflex in Georgia, that's what we always say, right? Ludwig, you know, how are they going to do a qualifications-based selection? That's the challenge we got to overcome. We got to get them to see that Ludwig, Florida and Ludwig, Tennessee are doing it, and it's working really, really well. Here's how Ludwig, Georgia can do it. So, but yes, long answer to short question, that's what we'd like to see is the qualification-based selection requirement that's already in place for Georgia state agencies to be expanded to include local governments, development authorities, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you have an update on the mass timber legislative change?
Trying to remember how close we got. I want to say we were real damn close.
It didn't sign it.
Did it get out and it didn't get signed? I think it didn't get out. My recollection, I honestly hadn't thought about the mass timber bill since about June of last year. My recollection was we made it out of one side or the other. It started in the House, right? Was it a House bill or was it a Senate bill? I feel like it was a House bill. I apologize. We were very, very involved in that bill, but I've kind of flushed that since then. So I think it was a House bill, it made it out of the House real quick, and then got gummed up in the Senate, and then of course they had a 3-month pause. And then I think it just didn't get over the hump there at the end. Not because there was any objections, just because, I mean, it's the saddest thing that ever happens in the General Assembly is a bill that kind of nobody opposes, but it just dies because it just didn't have that push at the end to get it over. And there was a big, you know, when they first were talking about coming back, they were basically talking about having just a list of like 10 bills, and those would be the only bills that they would consider. But then when they actually got back, they figured out, no, we can get some stuff done, so it's kind of a weird time. I'll check on that. If you'll give me your card, I'll check on it and see where it is. Of course, any legislation that did not pass last year is dead, because that was one General Assembly. We just elected a new General Assembly. This year, like any legislation that we introduce this session that doesn't pass, that still is alive next year if we don't get it passed. That wouldn't be the case with mass timber. But it was, like I said, there was no opposition that I recall.
So, is there a proposal to revise the requirements for registered land service to get to a 4-year degree?
It's popped up.
What was it?
The land surveyors requiring a 4-year degree for land surveyors. It's popped up, but I'll just say the land surveyors, the SAMSOG, Society of Mapping of Georgia, Surveying and Mapping Society of Georgia. Sorry, it took me a second to process that. SAMSOG is not in favor, mostly because there's already some challenges in getting surveyors certified in Georgia. You know, we lost the program at Kennesaw State because they had 2 graduates in 2 years. And it was really hard for me to go to President Sam Owens and say, hey man, you need to keep this program open, one surveyor a year, you know, have a whole program designed around it. We're currently talking, actually going to meet next Tuesday with the Technical College System of Georgia on this issue, because we think the Technical College System of Georgia is the right place to put the surveying training to get more surveyors trained and get more surveyors out in the field. But of course, that's a 2-year degree, not a 4-year degree. Yeah. Nationally, there's some push. I don't sense a lot of interest in it.
Yeah, I was just going to say it is ultra difficult to find an RLS.
I think we're fortunate too. You know, there's that 30+2 requirement that a lot of engineers in other states are pushing to increase the requirements for a PE that basically require graduate level work. I've never heard anybody in Georgia talk about it. Other states, it's a battle, it's a real thing. I've never heard anybody talk about it.
Maybe it's already tough to find it now.
Yeah. Well,
I don't want to make it any tougher.
No, we would obviously work with SAMSOG. We work very closely with SAMSOG on issues that relate to share licensure board. There's no appetite for that on our licensure board. It's a matter of licensure rulemaking authority, which is all you would need. You don't need a statute to change that. You just change the Appellate Board. But there's no appetite for that at the Appellate Board level.
Is there anyone talking on that master's degree required for a PE?
Yeah, 30+.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, not in Georgia. No. not in Georgia. And again, I know our appellate board members pretty well. I don't see any of them moving to do that. I mean, we're somewhat unique. I don't want to say unique, but as a profession, our licensure board, some licensure boards exist not to get more people in the profession, but to slow down the rate of people entering the profession, sort of supply and demand. The idea being, well, if there aren't enough of us, then you'll have to pay me more because I'm already in. Ours is the exact opposite. Our board understands very clearly, we need more, we need to get more license. They're not creating barriers to entry, and they're not trying to. But again, that's not necessarily the case in every state. Any others?
With regard to the governor's executive order for families and inspections, can you kind of walk through that process and explain how they can do the reviews, but they can't issue a permit? Is that right?
They can issue any kind of permit except for final CO. Everything else they can issue, the private plan reviewer or inspector can issue. Now there is a review process, and the local government can object, but they've got to provide the basis for that, and they've got to provide a resolution for that, and there's a shot clock involved in that, and if they don't do it within that period of time, then the license permit is issued. Again, everything up to, but not including the CO. Only the local authority can issue the CO.
So that could be the land disturbance permit?
Yeah, there's a little bit of ambiguity there. Certainly, having worked on the most recent revision of the bill and the executive order, and knowing everybody that was involved in the process, everyone understood that to be not just vertical construction, but also land disturbance, grading and grubbing, all that kind of stuff. But where we put it was in the vertical construction section of code. That has created a little bit of ambiguity at some local governments, although we, on behalf of the engineering industry, have been able to resolve that in most instances. One of the things I would like to do, and frankly, if I had known the governor's office had an appetite for coming back and making some additional changes to the law, which I do now because we just met with them yesterday, that's where I would like to get some clarification in making it clear that this is everything, soup to nuts, involved in the construction process, from initial land disturbance permit up to CO of the structures.
It's not going to be you get a building permit if you don't have your land disturbance permit.
Yeah.
So I guess the other reason I mention that is Augusta says that they have 45 days to review your plans.
That's the part that the governor wants to tighten up.
So can you run through that process? If they say, yep, we got 45 days, what's the process from there? How do you
Well, they don't have 45 days. They used to have 45 days. Until 2019, when we revised the law, they had 30 business days, which worked out to be 45 calendar days. We tightened that in 2019, and that's law, regardless of what the governor's talking about right now. It's 30 calendar days.
Some don't.
I would be happy to explain that to them on behalf of the engineering industry.
You can check, and they even have a counter on their plan review thing that starts at 45.
Yeah, it was until 2019, but July 1, 2019, it became a 30-day shot clock. And now what the governor, so the way the fee structure works is basically you go to them and you say, hey, can you do this thing within the time limit provided in law? And if they say they can, then you can either use them or you can pay them 50% of the fee. No, you can either use them or pay 100% of their fees and go private at that point. Only if they say, no, we can't do it within that time period, you get to pay 50% of the fees. The governor would like to have both of those scenarios, it would be 50% of the fees. So there's definitely some opportunities here because we have the governor who is a former home builder and real estate developer who's interested in this section of code and interested in making some changes. There's definitely some opportunities for some tweaks. So to the extent anybody has any ideas about tweaks that you'd like to see made, now would be a very good time to send me an email. But I should also say, what we do on behalf of the engineering industry, most people think about as passing laws to the General Assembly, right? Which we do. That is a thing we do. Another thing that we do is represent the industry's interests at the local government level. When there's a local government that's either doing something that they shouldn't be doing or not doing something they should be doing, as long as we can characterize that as an industry issue, we will fight that battle on behalf of the industry, and they'll never know who called us. They'll never know which firm was upset. We'll just fight on behalf of the engineering industry. So to the extent those are things that would be useful to y'all in the future, please don't hesitate to contact me about that. But I'll be happy to talk to you about any changes that you think might ought to
So
be
you just have to formally get in writing that they can't get it done in 30 days. And
then you pay 50% and you go straight to private.
50%, and then you pay the fees for whoever's charging whatever.
Right. Right. Which what we've heard from the development community, they're happy to pay because time is money, so that is nothing compared to the amount of money that they save in being able to move the project quickly. I'll be around if anybody has any questions after this.
All right, let's give Sully a hand. Thank you so much, Sully, for that very informative talk about all of the stuff going on in Atlanta with our government. So we thank you for how you represent us, and he'll be around, as he said, and if you've got further ideas or questions, please use that valuable resource. I do want to recognize one of our own. Very excited. Many of you probably have heard that one of our very own and past president of this GSPE Augusta chapter, Kyle Titus, was recognized by GSPE as the Engineer of the Year in Government for 2020. So let's give him a hand. We're really excited. Congratulations, Kyle. Very proud of you. So as indicated on the sheet there, we've got our next meeting. Put that, save the date, February 25th, as usual, the fourth Thursday. We'll be right back here talking about the special local option sales tax. That's clause 8. So we'll have a speaker for that. And again, with the Engineers Week coming up just in about 3 weeks' time, we really need some ideas on the cards there, and anything else you want to pass on to us. Take a few minutes before you head off on that. So thank you again for coming today, and have a good rest of the week.